What's up, guys? Welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Erdell, and in today's video we're going to be covering a rare but honestly underrated option for white that has had success at the Master and Grandmaster level for decades. And it all starts off with e4, and following e5 we're going to go with the main option knight f3 attacking the pawn on e5, and following knight c6 there are a ton of good chess opening options here for white. On this channel we've covered bishop c4 with the Italian game and or Giuoco Piano, the Ruy Lopez with the bishop e5, and d4 with the Scotch Game or Scotch Gambit, and all of these are very strong chess openings, but usually black is well prepared for them. Is there any high-level chess opening, any high-level move here that black is usually not well prepared for? Well, today we're going to be covering c3 with the Ponziani Opening, a very good strategic move looking to prepare this d4 push. And first off, shout out to my guy for recommending that we make this video. I love hearing y'all's recommendations for chess openings, so if there's any chess openings you'd want to see covered on this channel, just let me know down in the comment section below and we'll try our best to make it happen. But guys, going back to this position, there's really only two moves here that give black a fighting chance, and that's either d5 or knight f6. If black doesn't play either of these moves and plays a move like bishop e7 or bishop c5 or a6, white's simply going to advance in the center of the board with d4, attack the pawn on d5, have d5 options. White's simply going to have an advantage going into the middle game. So let's go over these two moves with d5 and knight f6 in this video. First, going over d5, many would be tempted to take on d5, but following e takes d5, black could simply take that pawn back, play a move like bishop g4, putting pressure on the knight on f3, castle queenside, and honestly, I think black has the better game. So I recommend the move queen a4, a very hyper-dynamic move, but a very good one, putting pressure on the knight on c6, and we're also putting pressure on d5, and also now the pawn on e5. Now in this position, there's a few options for black. The first being f6, simply defending the pawn on e5. Another option is bishop d7, putting indirect pressure on the queen on a4. And the last one is d takes e4. Now let's go over these three moves. First, bishop d7. I think that it's very important to be ready for this move, and I actually recommend memorizing this opening line. We're going to take on d5, and many are wondering why is black giving up a pawn, but we now see knight d4, and at first glance it actually looks as if white is in trouble. The bishop on d7 is attacking the queen on a4, and this knight on d4 takes away both b3 and c2, so here white has to play the move queen d1, going back to the original square, and black would love to start playing moves like knight f6, bishop c5, take the pawn on d5, and get an attacking edge. But right now, the knight on d4 is actually being attacked by the pawn on c3. The only reason we didn't take the last move was because our queen was under fire. So by playing queen d1, we're threatening the knight on d4. And now after knight takes f3, we're going to take back with the queen, getting our queen in this game and also defending the pawn on d5. We're simply a pawn ahead here. And after knight f6, let's go with bishop c4, reinforcing the pawn on d5. And now after a move like e4, we have queen e2. Notice with our bishop on c4, it's not locked in now on that f1 square. And following a move like bishop d6, here white has to be careful. In the Ponziani Opening, guys, we have to play aggressive attacking chess, always fighting for the center of the board. It's very easy for white to get a disadvantage going to the endgame if white plays passively. We can't play a move like h3 or castling kingside or b3 or a3. We have to fight for the center of the board with the move d4. And following h6, I personally really like this bishop b3 idea. Bishop b3 is actually two-sided in its purpose. First off, this bishop has the potential to come to c2 and put pressure on the pawn on e4. But more than that, it opens up this pawn on c3 to play c4, protecting the pawn on d5, and even moves like c5 attacking the bishop on d6. We're going to continue with c4, knight c3, get our bishop in the game, and honestly, I think white is up a pawn and black doesn't have much to show for it in this variation. So that covers bishop d7. We're going to take the pawn on d5, and if knight d4, play queen d1, take the knight on f3, solidify our pawn on d5, and play chess a pawn ahead. Now, what about the move d takes e4? What do we do in this situation? Many would be tempted to play queen takes e4, but following queen takes e4, black simply has a better game. Black can play knight f6 with tempo, attacking the queen on e4, continue with moves like bishop g4, putting pressure on the knight on f3, queen d7, castle queenside, bishop c5. Honestly, white has a very passive position here, and white can't ever really break through with d4 because the e5 pawn, the knight on c6, and the queen on d8 all attack that square. So needless to say, we can't take that pawn on e4, and I personally recommend knight takes e5, snatching the pawn on e5, and then attacking the knight on c6 with both our centralized knight on e5 and the queen on a4. Now the most popular move for black is queen d5, doing two things. First off, defending the knight on c6 and also attacking our knight on e5. And here I simply like taking the knight on c6, and if queen takes e6, we have this bishop b5 idea, and white is clearly winning that game, as white will get a full queen for only one minor piece. So here after b takes c6, yes, black has saved the queen, but now black has very poor pawn structure, an isolated pawn on a7 and double isolated pawns on c7 and c6, and the c6 pawn in particular is very vulnerable to attack, as well as the pawn on e4 at this moment. So we're going to continue with bishop c4, protected by our queen and attacking the opponent's queen on d5. And following queen d6, I like the move d3. This is actually a key move in this variation. Now, what on earth is white doing? I mean, it appears as if white is simply giving up a pawn, but now we're going to castle kingside, and after a move like bishop e7, the purpose of d3 is seen, as we can now play bishop f4. If we didn't play d3, the bishop on c1 would be locked in, but now we can play bishop f4 with tempo attacking the queen on d6, and it appears as if black can just take that bishop, but then we take the pawn on c6, attacking both the king and the rook, and white has a simply better game there. So following the move queen d7, more or less forced, defending the pawn on c6, we're now going to play rook d1. So by playing d3, we get our bishop in the game, and now play rook d1, ready to snatch the pawn off the board. And after knight f6, we have rook takes d3. And here, guys, I simply think that white has a one game. I mean, look at the bishop here. A bishop on f4 attacking the c7 pawn, a bishop on c4 attacking the f7 pawn, a rook on d3, very active on the d file, and a queen on a4 putting pressure on that c6 pawn. It's simply a better game for white. And here, let's just say black plays a move like knight d5. Well, we now have rook takes d5, and following c takes d5, bishop b5, forming a battery ram, and now the queen on d7 is pinned to the king, and white is completely winning. So the key there is after d takes e4 to not take with the queen, but take that pawn on e5, take the knight on c6, and enjoy an advantage in development and pawn structure. Now what about the move f6? I actually like this move for black, but I would still give the edge to white, as we can now play bishop b5, forming a battery ram on a4 and b5, attacking the knight on c6, and following a move like knight e7, we now have e takes d5, and following queen takes d5, d4. Again, guys, in the Ponziani opening, we have to fight for the center. If we don't fight for the center, black will have a clearly better game. So here we play d4, and after a move like bishop d7, we're going to castle kingside, and at least when I first went over this opening, I was wondering, wait a second, why can't black just play e4, attacking the knight on f3, and after a move like knight fd2, f5? I mean, it appears as if black just has a clearly better game here. The pawn on f5 and pawn on e4 are very advanced. Here black can castle kingside, play a move like f4 and f3, and I simply didn't see a way for white to get an advantage coming out of this opening. But then I went over the theory, and knight b3 here is actually a surprisingly strong move, and its idea is to come eventually to the square of c5, and following a move like knight e5, and this is actually a pretty strong move for black. By playing knight e5, we could take the knight on e5, but then bishop takes b5 would be played, attacking both our queen on a4 and the rook on f1, so we can't take the knight, but instead play knight a3, a very strong move, and in most openings I wouldn't recommend putting a knight pair on a3 and b3, but here the knights are surprisingly dangerous. The knight on a3 defending the bishop on b5, and the knight on b3 attacking that c5 square, and black can fall into trouble very quickly here, as the knight pair is very strong. We have a queen on a4 and bishop on b5, and our pawn on d4 is attacking that e5 knight. For example, what if the move bishop takes b5 is played? Well, we're now not going to take with the queen, but take with the knight, and now we have two threats. The first being taking that knight on e5, and we also have knight takes c7 and knight d6 double check ideas. So here black has to get out of the way with king f7, and here we could take the knight on e5, but I believe white even has a larger advantage after knight takes c7, forking the queen on d5 and the rook on a8. And following a move like queen c4, we're going to snatch that queen off the board, snatch the rook, and now we're up a rook and pawn, and black has really nothing to show for it. White is completely winning this game. So y'all, that covers the move d5, in which we're going to play queen a4, putting pressure on the knight on c6, pawn on d5, and pawn on e5. And if y'all memorize those 3 opening variations, you are going to be prepared for anything that comes your way. But what about the move knight f6? What do we do in this situation? I mean, usually after a move like knight f6, we could play knight c3 and defend that pawn. But now we have the pawn on c3. Do we play a move like queen c2 or d3? Now, many people prefer these moves, but I personally think that it's too passive for white. I mean, after the move d3, black can continue with d5, advancing in the center of the board, play bishop g4, pinning our knight on f3, queen d7, castling queenside. Black just has so much activity in this game, and white really doesn't have much to show for it. So again, I think that any Ponziani player has to fight for the center of the board with this key d4 idea, attacking the pawn on e5, and also threatening potential d5 ideas, gaining space in the center of the board. And now black has a few interesting options. I mean, what does black do with the centralized pawn on d4, attacking the pawn on e5? Black needs to do something. And the 3 most popular options at the Grandmaster level is first taking the pawn on d4, knight takes e4, taking the centralized pawn, and d6, simply defending the pawn on e5. Now let's first go over e takes d4. And against e takes d4, we're not going to take back with the c pawn or the knight on f3, but simply play e5, advancing in the center of the board very aggressively and attacking that knight on f6. And now black has a very interesting decision. Does black bring the knight to d5, or does black bring the knight to e4? Well, first looking at knight e4, white has a very key move, queen e2, absolutely beautiful idea, attacking the knight on e4, and indirectly the king on e8. Why would I say that the queen is indirectly attacking the king on e8? Well, as y'all can see, the knight on e4 is not defended. We're threatening to take it, and the really only 2 ways for black to defend this pawn is either d5 or f5. But in either of these cases, we're simply going to use the en passant rule. And again, the knight is going to be under attack. So going over the move, d5, again, we have en passant here. And now the knight is under attack once again. So we now see f5, and obviously we can't en passant again because our pawn is on d6. But we can now simply take on d4. And following knight takes d4 and c takes d4, we now see a very good chess opening position for white with this f3 idea in the game, attacking the knight on e4. And if we can get f3 in, there's just no way for black to save the knight. Really, the only way to do this is by playing a move like bishop e6, in which we're still going to play f3, or king f7, in which we could play queen c4 with check. So there's really no easy way to nicely save that e4 knight. So following a move like bishop takes d6, we can now play f3, and many white players might not be comfortable with this f3 move because of queen h4 check. Now I usually, in this position at first glance, would not be comfortable at all with f3 because of queen h4, but we can now play king d1, and black can't really do anything with this knight. The knight can't come to g3 or f2 because it's literally pinned to the king on e8. So following castling kingside, we can now take the pawn, and true, black does have an advantage in development and this very strong bishop g4 idea, pinning the queen to the king on d1, but we can now play queen c4, checking the king with tempo, and following king h8, now go with bishop e3. Here black is down a piece, and I'm just not seeing any real advantage coming out of that. I mean, yes, our king on d1 is a little exposed, but there's really no way to get this king into a checkmated position. If a move like bishop g4 check, we just play bishop e2. And if bishop takes e2, we just take back with the queen, and I'm just not seeing any way for black to get that piece back. I would give a clear advantage to white here. Now, if you plug this position into any computer program, it's going to tell you that either d5 or f5 are the best options, but I can totally see why black would not be comfortable with either of these because of the en passant idea. So here, what if black plays a move like knight c5, getting the knight out of the line of fire? Well, we can now play c takes d4, attacking the knight on c5, and if knight e6, we have d5, forking both of the knights. And on top of that, guys, just look at our centralized pawns. Both of these pawns on d4 and e5 are very strong and give white a huge space advantage in this game. Now, if black doesn't want to get forked with the move d5, black will play a move like knight a6, but now the knight on a6 is extremely awkwardly placed, and we're just going to continue to play natural developmental chess with a move like knight c3, and after bishop b4, we have a space advantage because of our pawn on e5, so why not use it by playing queen e4, and after castling kingside, bishop d3, threatening mate in 1, and following g6, bishop g5, attacking the queen on d8. White has a simply better game here, and honestly, this game is probably not going to last much longer. So that covers the move knight e4, in which we play queen e2. What about knight d5? What do we do here? Well, I personally, against knight d5, prefer the move queen b3. C takes d4 is the most popular option, but black actually wins most of these games. But after the move queen b3, it's been really hard for black to find an even game. We're attacking the knight on d5, and following a move like knight b6, again, we're going to take on d4, forming very strong centralized pawns in the center of the board here. And if d5, we're going to continue with bishop e3, bishop d3, and after a move like bishop e6, play knight bd2, castle kingside, swing a rook to c1. There's really not much black can do from stopping white from playing through this plan, and I like white's game here. I think that white has a slight advantage with the strong bishop pair on d3 and e3, as well as a solid rook on c1, and I simply think that with this e5 pawn and d4 pawn, white has a space advantage in the center of the board, and if someone gave me this position and said, hey, which side would you rather be, I would much rather be white. So that covers the move e takes d4. We're not going to take the pawn back, but play e5 aggressively, going after that knight on f6, potentially taking back with the c pawn on d4 and forming a space advantage in the center of the board. What about the move knight takes e4 immediately? What do we do here? Do we take the pawn on e5? Do we play a move like bishop d3? These aren't necessarily terrible options, but I believe that d5 is by far the best move, attacking the knight on c6 and forcing the knight away from the e5 pawn. This knight on c6 is defending the e5 pawn, and after black's next move, we're going to snatch that pawn off the board. And if a move like knight g6 is played, we can simply take the knight on g6, play bishop d3, attacking the knight on e4, and if knight c5, attacking our bishop, we don't want to give up our bishop, so we can bring our bishop back to c2. Again, we have a very strong bishop pair on c2 and c1, and after a move like d6, play bishop e3, and I would give a slight edge to white here. I really like white's chances. We're going to continue with a move like knight a3, castle kingside, bring the queen out to say d2 or e2, bring the rooks to the center files, and white has a very nice game going into the middle game. And last but not least, the move d6. Here black simply trying to hold the position together, and I personally don't recommend taking the pawn on e5 or playing d5 immediately, but instead just naturally developing the pieces. We're going to play bishop d3, and after a move like g6, play castling kingside. Notice how it's never really a good option for black to take the pawn on d4, because we could simply take back with our c pawn, which we moved at move 3 in this game, and white is simply going to have an advantage in the center of the board on d4 and e4, and black's not really going to have much to show for it. So here it's in black's best interest to not take the pawn, but simply keep developing. But after this happens, we're just going to play h3, protecting the square on g4, so neither the knight or the bishop can come to that square. And following castles, play rook e1, play knight a3. Again, there's not really much that black can do from stopping white's plan here. After h6, we'll play knight c2. A very interesting maneuver here, playing knight a3 and knight c2, but the purpose of the knight on c2 is really two-sided. First off, it supports our centralized pawn on d4, and second off, it prepares a b4 push. Following a move like a6, we can now play bishop d2, and after bishop d7, go with a4, preparing a b4, d5, c4, c5 pawn push on the queen side, and I really like white's game. I think that white has a clear advantage on the queen side, and it's true. Black can play a move like knight h7 or knight h5, and I try to attack on the king side of the board, but I simply think that white has too big of a head start in this race. If you'd like to learn how to play the Giuoco Piano as white against e5 and knight c6, one of my favorite chess openings for white, click the video to the left. If you'd like to explore more chess openings in general, click the playlist to the right. Leave a comment to let me know what other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.